book's called Apple in China, the capture of the world's greatest company. I've got to tell you something. You know, I'm not much of a reader. I was going to wait for the movie to come out. But honestly, like, this is jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
This book is jaw-dropping and so well-researched. It's not a polemic. It's not hyperbole. It's the story of how China basically was built as a country by Apple. Is that...
Yeah, like I say that sometimes, and it sounds totally unhinged, and I get that.
Yes.
Right? And yet, like, what happened is, like, I came across internal documents after speaking with 200 people, and I figured out that Apple was investing, by 2015, $55 billion a year into China. So this is mostly like they spend loads of money, billions of dollars, on machinery that they put on on production lines that are sort of orchestrated by Apple but not owned by them.
So they're building the machinery.
Yeah.
But they're outsourcing that. They're hiring companies to build this.
Like like outsourcing is the word, and yet there's something so
they own the means of production with it.
They own. Okay. So I compare it to like the way Uber is the largest taxi provider in the world without owning any cars.
Right.
It's the same thing for manufacturing.
Right.
So none of the factories are owned by Apple, and yet they have like maniacal control over the machinery within those factories.
Right.
And so then they're doing, like, I quote someone saying, we treat the workers like our arms and legs, like you do this and you do that. And the number of people they've trained like that is 28 million, so larger than the labor force of California since 2008. And the number of billions of dollars they spend on machinery is, $14 billion, I think, is the peak year. So some of that's public, and other of this material is not public.
So these documents, the numbers seem fantastical.
Of course. And yet, well, they do and they don't, right?
Right.
So 55 billion is a
year.
55 billion is per year. That's the investment. A lot of that is training costs for the employees in China. And the number of employees, like per Tim Cook's public estimate, right, is 3 million people are assembling iPhones and other Mac products in China.
But
right.
These aren't just low-level, like, it's a million people doing...
Both. Lots of unskilled jobs, the ones that Howard Lutnick wants to bring back to America.
Yes.
Yep. And lots of PhDs at Foxconn.
Right.
Really sophisticated.
Right.
But my point is, like, lots of times people think there's great vocational training in China. The vocational school in China is Apple.
They've trained all these workers.
Yes, they've done a huge job. So let me just put the 55 billion in context.
Please.
I could not find any corporate equivalent for how much someone is investing in another country. So I had to go to government efforts. So you look at something like the CHIPS Act, right? Biden's flagship plan, let's bring chip fabrication back to America. That's 53 billion over 4 years, right? Another way of saying that Apple is investing quadruple what the Commerce Secretary called a once-in-a-generation investment in America. So that's nuts. And then you go back to the Marshall Plan, and you're thinking, okay, so maybe it's like half of the Marshall Plan, something like that. Like, that's going to be crazy. People are going to relate to that. So I take the Marshall Plan spending from 1948 to 1952, right? This is sort of like America saving Europe after the World War II.
Yeah.
And you convert it to 2015 dollars, and it's half the annual spending of what Apple's investing in China.
This is $130 billion in 16 countries.
16 countries versus one.
Versus one country.
Yeah, and it's not one, right? It's like the modern equivalent of the Soviet Union. Like, it's our biggest adversary. And so, I sort of end the book, not to sort of like get so ahead of myself here.
No spoilers.
Yeah.
Oh my God, does Apple die?
Well, paperback version?
I don't want to tell people.
So I say that as China, as their GDP eventually overtakes America, and especially because they're doing so good in the advanced electronics sector, more people are going to ask, how did they do it? Like, how did they go from such poverty 50 years ago into the world's greatest maker of, like, military weaponry and advanced electronics? And a big portion of the disquieting answer is, year in, year out, Apple taught them.
They do this, by the way, this is China. And this is not to single out. This was a decision that Apple made, not with this intention.
No, not at all.
It was, it began, I guess, it began with shareholder capitalism, I guess, in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, not to walk back to it, but
that's very much in the book. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I mean, it's that ethos of you do what's best for the shareholder, so you're searching out the cheapest labor, the lowest products. But it really, it seemed like Xi Jinping was it 2013, is what made this so fraught. Would that be correct to say?
Well, yes, because I would say, so my thesis is really that they sleepwalked into this crisis. I mean, you cannot blame Apple for moving into China in the early 2000s. For starters, the American consensus was that we're going to inculcate the next great democracy.
They joined the WTO. They came in.
I mean, there was broad political support to do that. The problem was when Xi Jinping really turns China in an authoritarian and belligerent direction, it's not like Apple was on the sidelines not noticing. They were attacked within 36 hours of Xi ascending to the presidency.
Tell them about Consumer Day.
Consumer Day is something that happens March 15th every year in China, and basically it goes back to 1991. And there's someone in the audience like, I know Consumer Day. Yeah, I have read this book.
Beware the eyes of Consumer Day.
Okay, so companies are called out for like not living up to the socialist ethos. Okay, and it's increasingly Western companies in the mid 2000s. And McDonald's is 2012, and the book opens with 2013. Apple is attacked on Consumer Day, and it's for warranty differences of all things. The story.
And it turns out to be not actually true, right?
Well, it's okay. So
little.
How much time do we have? It's the most fascinating part of the narrative.
Comedy Central has no other program. Okay. Like literally, there's no other program. It's just us chickens. They got nothing.
I'm going to give you the 30-second version, but this is 4 chapters in the book, okay? Demand for iPhone in China after 2010 is wild, okay? There are 4 stores for 1.4 billion people, okay? So 1 store per 350 million people, and the iPhone becomes the most conspicuous, like, status symbol imaginable in the country. And so what happens is these gangsters called yellow cows notice this imbalance, and they begin paying migrants by the busload to come over to the store and snake around the store, 6,000 to 7,000 people at times, to buy as many iPhones as possible. And then they go to a city like Chongqing, population 32 million, number of Apple stores 0, and they find ways, legal and illegal, to sell iPhones at more money. They're making more money than Apple per iPhone.
Right.
Okay? So it's absolutely wild. What happens is Apple eventually catches on to this a little bit because they're doing nefarious things. They're buying phones in the US. They're using fake ID. They're buying phones for less than $100 so that they can, make even more fat margins on them and stuff. And so they begin actually burning out the CPU of the phone, deliberately breaking it in the process, but rendering it, you can no longer see where it's come from.
Right.
So they're masking the retail origin. Okay, so what happens is Apple catches wind of this and they begin refurbishing these deliberately broken units rather than replacing them.
Right.
By refurbishing it, they're doing something that they're not doing in other countries. Right? So they're actually.
So they take that as an insult in China.
Yeah, exactly. So without probably knowing the full story, CCTV, which is like the state-sponsored CNN of China, attacks Apple for treating the Chinese in a way that's inferior to the rest of the world.
Okay.
That was 12 years ago, reported by every media outlet, and they never figured out what the story was with the yellow cows and how it came to be.
Oh, wow.
So that's why it's so significant. That's why it's the prologue.
And so at that moment, shares of Apple then start to go down. It becomes less popular in China, yes?
I honestly don't remember if shares really fall down. To be honest, the media's eyeballs were not on China at all during this time.
Right. I meant in China.
But sales in China. Yeah, they sort of freeze and then they actually sink.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Apple's response to that is what?
Placate local officials, hire a team of people that call themselves the Gang of 8. These are the first senior people living in China.
What an unfortunate title.
Yeah. And so these are the sort of eyes and ears of Cupertino living in China. First time they've had senior people there, and they basically strategize what's our message to Beijing? Why are we in the country, and how do we demonstrate to them we're not this exploitative power? Look at how much we're doing for you. They're the ones who come up with, we're investing a nation-building effort in China. Get off our back. You have no idea how much we're helping you.
Right.
And the fruit really is in the pudding. Fruit in the pudding? Whatever. Proof is in the pudding. Proof is in the pudding. The top smartphone makers in the world these days are all Chinese, right? So Oppo, Vivo, Huawei, Xiaomi, they have 55% global market share.
Right.
And my sort of comment on this is we think iPhone killed Nokia. iPhone never had more than 20% global market share. They're not big enough to have killed Nokia. Who killed Nokia? The Chinese competition. Why did the Chinese competition do so well? Because Apple trained all their suppliers.
So they trained their competitors to build a product that would be commensurate with their product, but would be a Chinese-owned company, and those companies start to gain market share on Apple.
Yeah, so the early years of making the iPhone, Apple was really proprietary about all its processes. It would not want those suppliers to market their opportunities, their technical capabilities to everybody else. But what happens is when they obviate the need for a new design, like Johnny Ive taking a corner and getting rid of aluminum or something like that.
And that's the whole deal for Apple. It's beautiful. The shit's beautiful.
Yeah, but if you sort of remove some aspect of the phone and you no longer need that supplier and they're so dependent on you, well, what happens? They go bankrupt. So instead, Apple begins to say, that's a problem for us. So we deliberately say to our suppliers, however fast you're growing with us, with Apple, grow that fast with somebody else. Because otherwise you're going to be too dependent.
Because they don't want to get blamed for...
Exactly. But if I'm building a component for an iPhone, what is the skill set I have and what can I do with it? Of course I'm going to supply Huawei and Oppo and Vivo. That's the only logical thing to do.
So they now have a real problem on their hands. They have trained their competitors and made it part of their business model that their competitors get healthy and do that.
Yeah.
And they're about to face a real struggle, and someone saves them. Who is it that saves them? Patrick.
What?
Patrick, I read your book.
so my thesis is that
what did they declare
stuck.
about Huawei? Somebody declared something about Huawei that puts Apple back on.
Somebody declared something about Huawei.
It's when the Trump administration said that Huawei was a security threat.
Oh, yes. Okay, right.
Okay.
Correct. So in 2019...
Don't you read the books I give you?
So in 2019, Huawei, China's national champion, outsells the iPhone globally. Apple is panicking about this, and I've got all these internal emails that have never been reported on, where, I mean, Tim Cook and others basically understand for weeks ahead of an earnings call that Huawei is the reason why their phone isn't selling well, and they deliberately obfuscate this from investors.
That's one of my favorite parts of the book.
I mean, the chapter is called 5 Alarm Fire because a VP at Apple, that's what he describes the situation, like how do we get sales to be better? And Tim Cook tells deputies, quote, this is a disaster. We need all hands on deck now. And then when he speaks to investors a week or two later, all is fine. Yeah. Internally, China's sales forecast is actually shrinking. It's not growing slowly, it's shrinking. And they don't tell investors any of this. So that's a crazy thing. Now, Trump comes into office basically saying he's going to get his users, consumers, his citizens, what am I trying to say? His fans.
His fans.
To boycott Apple.
Yes.
He's really harsh on Apple.
That's right.
Wants everything to be built in America.
That's right. Wants them to come back. He's laying the wood on them.
Instead, he totally saves them.
Yes.
Because when Huawei's at its peak, he goes after Huawei, deprives them of using Google, which of course makes Android.
Declares them a security threat.
Declares them a security threat, and deprives them of using, wonky things like Qualcomm 5G chips. Huawei's business nearly collapses. They lose $30 billion of revenue in a year, and their market share really tanks. They have to hive off assets and stuff. Great for a while. I mean, the only company that really benefits from that is Apple. So their market share in China doubles from 9% to 17%. So they do really well. But now, in Trump 2.0, Huawei's had all this time to really work hard, and so they're sort of back with a vengeance. So now, in the global smartphone world, there's iOS, there's Android, and there's Harmony OS. This is my guess. Harmony OS will become the de facto standard for all operating system phones in China.
Wow.
That's a guess.
Right.
I think an educated one. And then the question is, do they then market that overseas? And you sort of have a Chinese firewall iPhone becoming, Huawei phone.
What I find so interesting about, so we think about, step out now in a macro view. We think about these companies as kind of monoliths, as monopolies and all this sort of thing. And the American viewpoint is always trust busting. We got to go in and break up these companies. This is somewhat of a monopolistic operation, but they are going to break themselves up by training competitors to compete with them. They're actually creating a far more competitive market than ever would have given our standard business practices. So the irony is they create a more competitive market in an authoritarian state.
Yes. It's so much worse than that.
To me. So much worse than that, really?
Okay, the reason it's worse than that
yes.
because they're not just creating phones. What else can you do if you've got world-leading electronic skills?
Oh.
First of all, what's an EV? It's a smartphone on wheels. So the reason why EVs in China are so damn good is that Apple taught all their suppliers, and the suppliers of phones like Huawei and Xiaomi
Tesla did the same with their factories.
And I have a fascinating section on Tesla, who specifically hires Apple people in China to run the same playbook.
Okay.
Yeah. And sorry, the reason why I said it was worse, I haven't got to that point.
Oh, God. All right.
What else can you build? Drones, military weaponry. Right? So you're sort of facilitating the potential annexation of Taiwan by giving out these skill sets for the last quarter century.
You know, you could have said that in the book. I didn't see that. It's fascinating. But here's the other part that I think is, that's when you realize this whole idea of reshoring and industrialization, that the idea that tariffs, this weirdly simplistic, cudgel that we're going to do there, is so woefully short as far as this. This is the result of years of intense state-run industrial planning that was intentional, it was purposeful. It's literally called Project 2025 in China. It's China's Project 2025.
Yeah.
So when you think now, and Apple says, oh, well, we're going to spend $500 billion back in the United States, where?
Okay.
And how?
So I'm so glad you mentioned this. It's such ludicrous nonsense, okay?
It has to be.
The press release that says that we're going to spend $500 billion in the U.S. Literally says, and we'll create 20,000 jobs. Like, how bad would a government program be if it spent $500 billion and all it got was 20,000 jobs?
Right.
Right. So the money...
It makes no sense.
Right. If it were true... Nice. If it were true, then you would have factories springing up in every state you could think of with jobs for engineers here, there, and everywhere. This is only my educated guess, but I can't think of how the math adds up anywhere else. They are counting in the $500 billion share buybacks and dividends, because Apple spends more than $100 billion a year on share buybacks. 70% of their investors are in America. Ipso facto, that's a kind of an investment in America, right? So that's the only way that the math works.
And because we are now living through an announcement presidency, because that really is what we are living through. This presidency is the mission accomplished presidency. It's just a dude on a destroyer with a giant banner behind him that says mission accomplished, even though it has no basis in reality.
Yeah.
And that's how we get things done. And so this idea of like $15 trillion in investment coming back to America, you're like, where?
Yeah.
How? But what's so despicable about the entire thing is we could have done all this here. All of it. We could
no,
have.
I'd actually disagree.
Okay, we were so close to being best friends. What is happening?
So China has things we'll never compete with, like density of population.
Yes.
And the way that the rural population sort of is actually not allowed to raise their children in places like Shenzhen, so they have to be floating around.
We can do that here.
So, I'm a big fan of friendshoring rather than reshoring, right? We should be doing what we did in China, but with allied nations like India, like Mexico, but it's probably not going to happen in Pittsburgh.
But we have to also build up, though, those ancillary businesses. By allowing this, we really did hollow ourselves out.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm convinced.
The only thing I would say is that really happened in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
I mean, Apple was the last holdout that did not do that.
Yes. This is not meant, by the way, to be so hypercritical of Apple. This is the example, but this is merely one of myriad examples of how our industrial policy got the way it got.
So completely. I sort of refer to the book sometimes as a Trojan horse, where what I'm trying to sell you on is the sex appeal of the world's greatest company. But what you're actually going to learn about is some Chinese history, the importance of the US-China tech battle, and things like supply chains. But if I said, John, can you have me on the show? I've got a great book about supply chains. You'd be like, no thanks. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you were saying something about something, but I don't remember what that was. The book is phenomenal.
Thank you.
Truly, jaw-dropping and generally true. Thank you so much for being here. Apple in China, available now. Patrick McGee.